Okay, and with that, we'll go ahead and jump into our text. We'll be in chapter 13. Chapter 13, verses 1 through 10. And the dragon stood on the sands of the seashore. And then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. And I saw one of the heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to make war with him?" There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them, and the authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And all those who dwell upon the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. One of the more interesting chapters in a very interesting book altogether, huh? Now the dragon, he stands on the seashore. He stands on the sands of the seashore. And that imagery, the sands of the seashore, say that a few times fast. Genesis chapter 22, Genesis chapter 32, the promise given to the patriarchs, the promise given to Abraham, is that your descendants will be as numerous as the sands of the seashore. Now we're going to see the sands of the seashore again here in the book of the Revelation. Revelation chapter 20, verse 8, a countless multitude. We'll also see that the harlot, who has not been introduced yet, the harlot sits on many waters. And the many waters are many peoples and nations and tongues. The bottom line is that the text is telling us that Satan has had great influence. He had great influence in the first century. He's had great influence throughout the centuries. And one of the worst things that I think we as modernists in the 21st century have ever thought of or accepted was the idea that the way to worship the dragon, or the way to worship the beast, had to do with black magic and seances and pentagrams and calling out the name of the devil and so forth. And I think that that's been a great deceptive tool of the devil. There have been movies and there have been heavy metal acts throughout the years who have influenced a number of people that direction. But there's also been movies and pop groups not associated with upside down crosses, not associated with album covers with goat heads and stuff like that, but instead their music though and their movies have been laced with premarital sex, have been laced with do what thou wilt, do whatever you want to do, be your own God, things of that nature. And so Satan has had greater influence than heavy metal throughout the years. The sea. Now you and I might think of the sea as a rather nice place to take a cruise. We'll get on a ship and we'll have a nice cruise and stuff like that. But you'll remember that in the ancient world, the sea was a symbol of chaos. It was a symbol of danger. It was a symbol of death and destruction. Now, you'll remember that this beast here in 13, he comes up out of the sea. But in chapter 11, verse 7, with the two witnesses, he's said to come up out of the abyss. So the sea and the abyss are being linked here in a very particular way. You'll remember that the demons inside of the man, who the demons that identified themselves to Jesus as Legion, for we are many, they wanted not to be cast into the abyss, but instead they wanted to be cast into the swine, into the pigs. And Jesus gave them permission, and then the pigs rushed into the sea, rushed into the abyss. So, did they get what they asked for or not? But the text is linking this beast that's coming out of the sea here with the killing of the two witnesses. So the time periods are the same time period. Another interesting thing is that this beast, his description is very, very similar to the description of the dragon. I need to catch up here on my notes. There we go. The dragon is said to have 7 heads and 10 horns, chapter 12, verse 3. The beast is said to have 10 horns and 7 heads. So a bit of the mirror image of him. However, the dragon has 7 diadems and the beast has 10 diadems on his horns. So a little bit different going on here. Now, the imagery of the beast, where exactly did John get this imagery of the beast? It comes straight out of Daniel chapter 7. There, the 4 beasts, they come out of the sea. And it's important to note that they are Gentile nations that are going to rule over God's people. That's what we see in Daniel chapter 7. There is the lion with the eagle's wings, and that's Babylon. There's the bear raised up with 3 ribs in its mouth. That's Medo-Persia. There's the leopard with 4 wings and its head. That's the Greek Empire. And finally, the large iron teeth beast with 10 horns. That's Rome. This beast right here that we see in Revelation chapter 13, he's a composite. He's a mixing of all of these beasts together. Now, it would be pretty obvious to the first century reader that Rome, first century Rome, is definitely connected to this beast. This beast makes arrogant boasts and blasphemies. Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, 11, 20 seems to fit here with Revelation chapter 13, verses 5 through 6. He also wages war against the people of God, very similar to that beast in Daniel chapter 7. Here in verse 7, still in chapter 13, he wages war against the saints, the people of God. So this beast, this beast from the sea in Revelation 13, he is Rome, but I want to explain it this way. Rome is not identical with this beast. Rome is a part of this beast. This beast is much greater than Rome because this beast is a merger of all 4 of the beasts from Daniel chapter 7. Also, you'll notice that 42 months was given to this beast, and that's the same period of time. That's the same period of time that we've already seen before. The 3.5 years is symbolic for this time throughout the church age. Now, I already suggested, and I want to continue this suggestion, that Rome is a part of this second beast. But the second beast, it transcends Rome. It's also pre-Islamic Arabia and its governments that persecuted Christians, that persecuted the people of God. It's ancient and modern Islamic governments, so Islamic governments of the past and Islamic governments of today that persecute the people of God, that persecute Christians. Not to whitewash world history, but it's also the Crusades. It's also the Crusades where white Europeans went into the Levant, went into the area. They killed Arabs, they killed Jews, and they also killed Christians. They killed the people of God. So they too are part of this beast. It was and it is China and North Korea and Pakistan and all of the governments from the first century to today that have persecuted the church, who have persecuted the people of God. They are part of this beast. This beast is not to come. This beast has come, and this beast is. And this beast will continue until the return of Christ. Now, there's a mimicking of Jesus going on with this beast. One of its heads, as if it had been slain, and that word slain takes us back, it's the same word used in Revelation chapter 5 verse 6 to refer to the Lamb who was slain. This fatal blow has been received by the beast, and yet he survived. He came to life. What is going on here? Well, I'm going to suggest to you that the images that John is seeing in this vision, he's giving us a bit of a reminder of the Nero legend. And again, that would depend on when the book is written. But there were rumors after Nero's suicide in 68 that he was still alive, that he had escaped from Rome, that he had gone to the east, that he was mounting an army and he was going to return and take back Rome. After his suicide in 68, that is then the beginning of the year of the four emperors. You have Galba and you have the others who are rather weak, and Rome is deteriorating into civil war, and it looks like Rome is about to fall. And then Vespasian restores order and establishes himself as the emperor. And you might be thinking, I know that name Vespasian. How do I know that name? Well, Vespasian at the time had been given command. This was during the Roman Jewish wars, and his job was to destroy Judea. Rome had had enough of these rebellious Jews. He was to march on Judea and he was to destroy it. There was going to be no treaty. There was going to be no peace. This was the end. Now, it's during this campaign that the troops and everybody know about what's going on in Rome, know about the suicide of Nero, and know about Galba and the others, and know that Rome is falling. Vespasian was one of the more popular, one of the more successful generals, and he returns to Rome, and he establishes himself as the emperor. He leaves Titus, his son Titus, to finish his campaign in Judea, and you'll remember Titus as the one who destroyed the temple in 70 AD. The Jewish sources said he did it on purpose. The Josephus and the Roman sources said it was an accident. But Titus then becomes the next emperor after his father Vespasian, followed by Domitian, another son of Vespasian. And so when Vespasian reestablishes Rome, he carries on for a good 3 decades this strong Roman revival. And so even though it looked like Rome, the persecutor of God's people, might end, that fatal wound was healed, and it continued to persecute the people of God. Those who are of the earth, they're amazed, and they follow and they worship the dragon, and they worship the beast. Now, false religion is anything that takes religion away, worship away from God, from Yahweh, from Christ. False religion is anything that suggests that it is the true religion, or that it is the way of salvation, or so forth. And that's what's going on here, especially with Rome. But Rome is not the first, and it's not the last government that ever had no such thing as a separation of church and state, which, by the way, is not in our Constitution, but that's a different story. But, Rome was both the government and the religion. It's those who dwell upon the earth. We've already seen them before. The martyrs under the altar, they cry out, "How long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood on those who dwell upon the earth?" And these people, their names are not written in the Lamb's book of life. There is then the statement that he makes war with the saints, that is, the beast makes war with the saints, and he overcomes them. That is, he kills them. You'll remember that it said he kills the two witnesses. There's apparent victory. And although the beast throughout world history has tried to kill the church, there could come a time in the near future that it does happen, that it seems the church is defeated. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. This is an echo back to the letters to the seven churches. If anyone is destined to go into captivity he goes. This comes right out of Jeremiah. If anyone kills by the sword he must be killed. I think this is a statement of the Christian does not overcome with the sword. Instead, the Christian overcomes by submission to God and His ways, and that is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. Now, one good question could be, is this beast of chapter 13 here, is he the Antichrist? John, of all people, would be the best author, New Testament author, to identify the Antichrist, seeing how that's a John term. We don't find that term in Matthew, we don't find that term in Paul, we don't find that term in Peter. Antichrist is a John term, and he chooses not to use that term here, so that's interesting. I think we have to listen to what John says about the Antichrist and Antichrists. John wrote that in the first century there were many antichrists. That's 1 John chapter 2 verse 18. I'm not positive whether or not John had in mind a single figure at the end of world history. It's possible. It's possible that John had in mind a single figure at the end of history, but more than that, John is convinced that there are already antichrists active, and the spirit of Antichrist is already active in the first century. 1 John chapter 2, chapter 4, 2 John chapter 1. And after in each of these, he uses the definite article "the" in front of Antichrist. That's why it's translated "the Antichrist." So who does John identify as antichrists? 1 John chapter 2 verse 22 denies that Jesus is the Christ, denies that Jesus was the Messiah, that He was the Son of God, that He came in the flesh, and that He died a real death. So any one of those, denying that Jesus is the Christ, denying that Jesus is the Son of God, denying that Jesus was He came in the flesh, He was human, and that He died a real death, all of those would put you in the category of Antichrist. So that puts a huge group of people throughout the last 2 millennia into the category of an Antichrist. You will also remember that Jesus said that others would claim to be the Christ, Matthew chapter 24, Mark chapter 13, and we have candidates in the 1st and 2nd century, Judas of Galilee, Theudas, they're both mentioned in the book of Acts. Judas of Galilee, it's either his grandson or his nephew or somebody in his family. You'll remember Masada during the Roman Jewish wars. You'll remember Masada. That's Judas of Galilee's line. And then about 100 years after the life of Christ, Simon Bar Kokhba was said to be the Christ, and that led to the Bar Kokhba revolt. Still in 1 John chapter 5 verse 1, only those who believe that Jesus is the Christ are born of God. Only those who believe that Jesus is the Christ are born of God. Now, in the context of 1 John and 2 John, I think we need to see some of the things that may accompany helping us to identify antichrists. They may claim to have fellowship with God. So simply because somebody claims to be a Christian, simply because somebody is in a church, they may even be in a position in a church, they may claim to have fellowship with God. If they have any of these other traits, they are an Antichrist. Interestingly, they claim not to have sinned, which could be a claim to moral purity. However, another factor could be taking one of the clear commandments of God and violating that clear commandment of God and then saying that I have not sinned in doing this. God's commandment is quite clear. Adultery is a sin. So if somebody in the church who claims to have fellowship with God, claims to be a member of the family of God, commits adultery and says, I have not sinned, that person is an Antichrist. And of course, adultery is only one of many. Today there are churches that have homosexual preachers and homosexual bishops and others, and they say that we are not sinning. Despite the fact that the Word of God says they are sinning, they are Antichrists. They claim to live in God, and they claim that they are in the light. There's a denial that Jesus is from God. That is the spirit of Antichrist, who even now in the first century was there. The denial that Jesus was from God, I believe Jesus being from God and Jesus being the Son of God is an exclusive claim. It's not an exclusive claim that I make, it's an exclusive claim that Jesus made. So then suggesting that an Antichrist is also from God, someone who denies that Jesus is the Christ, they're also from God, that would be this. That would be the spirit of the Antichrist that was in the world in the first century and is in the world today. They also denied that Jesus came in the flesh. This could be any number of things. In the late first century, second century, there was Gnostic teaching that flesh is bad and Jesus must not have had a literal body. This could be morphed into several teachings today. Now I want to draw your attention to this beast in chapter 13. This beast's blasphemies, chapter 13, verse 1, verse 5, 6, 16, verse 9, 11, 21, 17, verse 3. The only other time we see in the book of the Revelation blasphemy, it's associated with the synagogue of Satan, Revelation chapter 2, verse 9. Now I said there that this is not anti-Semitism, and I believe that it's still not anti-Semitism, but I believe that we have to see the truth. We can't sugarcoat the truth. And that truth is that Rome and the local governments under Rome and the local religions and the Jews denied that Jesus was the true king, that Jesus was from God, that Jesus was the Messiah. All of them deny that Jesus is who he says he is. And so all of them are under the beast, and they're following after and worshiping the beast. Paul mentions this fellow, the man of lawlessness. This is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I think we have to read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 in its context. Its context is the Thessalonians had come to the conclusion that because they were suffering, the day of the Lord had already come and they had missed it. Paul wants to assure them that the day of the Lord would only come after the apostasy and after the man of lawlessness was revealed. He identifies this man of lawlessness as one who opposes and exalts himself and takes his seat in the temple of God. This is where the futurist believes that there has to be a literal temple in Jerusalem again, so that when this fellow is revealed, he can take his seat in Jerusalem in the literal rebuilt temple. In this interpretation, it's not taken into account that every other reference in Paul, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, the times that Paul refers to the temple of God, he's referring to the church. The church being the temple of God. This is consistent with Pauline theology. In Acts chapter 17, Paul says that God does not dwell, he does not live in temples made by human hands. This is a Jew of the first century of the Second Temple period saying this while there's still a temple standing in Jerusalem. He's saying that God does not dwell in temples made by human hands. Therefore, it is consistent with Pauline theology to not believe in a literal third temple that will stand in geographical Jerusalem. Instead, perhaps this is somebody from within the church. You'll remember that the context of 1 John, the people John is identifying as Antichrist are succeeders, secessionists. This could be some person who takes his seat within the church. Paul makes reference to there's a he who now restrains him. There's been great debate over who the he is that restrains him. May I suggest, only God knows the last Christian martyr. In chapter 6, the souls of the martyrs under the altar cry out, "How long until you avenge our blood?" And you have to be patient, and you have to wait until the full number of your fellow bondservants are killed the way you were. Only God knows when the last Christian martyr will be. This fellow, Paul says, the man of lawlessness, his coming is in accord with Satan. It sounds an awful lot like this beast here in Revelation chapter 13. Paul talks about powers and signs and false wonders. That sounds an awful lot like the second beast that's going to come up here in chapter 13. And this person will be destroyed at Jesus' second coming. That also fits very well with Revelation chapter 19, chapter 20. Now, in any conversation about the Antichrist, somebody may bring up again Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9 is irrelevant in the discussion of the Antichrist, and it's irrelevant in the discussion of Revelation. There are no textual or image connections from Daniel chapter 9 with the book of the Revelation. Revelation has no 70 years. It has no 70 weeks. It has no rebuilding a temple. It has nobody making a covenant. It has nobody breaking a covenant. It has no temple sacrifices going on. And it has no end to temple sacrifices going on. So Daniel chapter 9 is irrelevant in the discussion of the Antichrist and the discussion of the book of Revelation. There is this Lamb's book of life, and people's names have been written into it. And this could be a thorny issue within the church. I realize that theologies such as Calvinism that are far more open to predestination, they have no problem with this verse, whereas Arminianism and those who don't embrace full predestination have a bit of a question about this, right? I'm what's called a soft determinist. I don't believe absolutely every event of world history, including which pair of socks you wore this morning. I don't believe God has predestined absolutely everything. However, there are events throughout world history that God has predestined. You can see this in Acts chapter 4. There, Peter talking to the people in verse 27, 28, Herod and Pilate and the Gentiles and the people of Israel, they did whatever your hand, God, your hand predestined to occur. You look at the Old Testament and the prophecies concerning the Messiah. You look at what Jesus did on the road to Emmaus. From the law and the prophets and the Psalms, he explained that the Messiah had to suffer. So something like the Messiah's suffering, that was predestined, yes. Genesis chapter 50, Jacob is dead or dying. The brothers are worried because now Joseph has power. Is he going to exact revenge upon them for selling him into slavery? He says to them, what you meant for evil, God intended for good. So there are events that God has orchestrated. But I want to point us to what I'm just going to call practical theology. Practical theology, you and I do not have access to the Lamb's Book of Life. You and I cannot look up somebody's name in the Lamb's Book of Life. So every person you and I encounter could be a name in the Lamb's Book of Life, and we need to act accordingly. First century Christians were martyred, they suffered, and John saw that as overcoming. Interestingly, anybody destined to go to captivity, anybody destined to be killed, but in this case it does seem to be the law of retribution. But I'll remind you, our author is John. John's brother was James. James in the book of Acts is killed by Herod with a sword. It's tradition that all of the apostles, save John, died martyrs' deaths. And they saw this as overcoming. And I think that speaks to us today. With that, we'll go ahead and continue in Revelation 13. We'll start in verse 11 and we'll go to verse 14. And we are doing very good on time. So let's see about this. Verse 11. Then I saw another beast come up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke as a dragon. And he exercises all of the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell upon the earth because of the signs which it was given for him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell upon the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and came to life. This second beast, I believe, also is a symbol, probably not a shocker to you, that I think that this beast is also a symbol. There is nothing in Daniel quite like this beast or the rest of the Old Testament. Some have seen in Daniel chapter 8 a connection because this beast has 2 horns and he speaks like a dragon. Now the lamb had 7 horns, but a lamb can have 2 horns. But he speaks like a dragon. And so the idea could be here that this is somebody who looks like Christ, but is actually the mouthpiece of Satan. Or, perhaps more accurately, this is somebody who comes in a religion that looks similar to Christ, but is actually the devil. Daniel chapter 8 mentions a ram that has 2 horns, but there's nothing else from Daniel chapter 8 that fits the context of what's going on here in 13. There's no male goat, there's no broken horn, there's no normal sacrifice. None of the rest of Daniel chapter 8 fits what's going on here in Revelation 13. This beast is later called the false prophet. That's in 1613, that's in 1920, and that's in 2010. Now a true prophet of God, points people towards God. We see in the Old Testament oftentimes false prophets and true prophets. Sometimes some of the false prophets have power. They even seem to have miraculous power. But they point away from the worship of God. One that comes to my mind is Balaam. He was mentioned earlier in the book of the Revelation. Balaam is a bit of a mystery. He's a prophet that seems to have Yahweh blessing or cursing powers. Yet he does not seem to be an Israelite. Balak sends for him, and Yahweh speaks to this non-Israelite prophet, saying that you can go, but you will only say the words that I tell you to say. Who is this fellow? Well, he is, it seems, a real prophet in the sense that he seems, based on the story, to have Yahweh blessing and cursing power. But he does not point people to the worship of Yahweh. Therefore, he is a false prophet. Now this beast, the second beast, he makes those who dwell upon the earth to worship the first beast. So he points the inhabitants of earth not to worship God, but to worship the beast, the state, the government, etc., etc. All these anti-Christian powers that have been throughout world history. And you can see how this would work in the first century. This would, of course, be the local government wanting to build a temple to the Caesar, wanting its local people to worship the Caesar. Why? Because that's going to carry favor with Rome for us. Now, when you're a pagan in the ancient world, you probably had your crop god, you probably had your rain god, you probably had your fertility god. To add another god to that was not converting. It was just worshiping another god. So for the pagan who already worships multiple gods to start worshiping Caesar, that's a non-thing. But to the Christian who can't say Caesar is Lord because Jesus is Lord, that's a real thing. So that's a thing then. It's also a thing now. In North Korea, to be a good North Korean citizen, you have to believe that the Kims, Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, they are so divine that they've never used the bathroom. Let's pretend that this morning you and I are going to come up with new superheroes. We're going to make a new comic book. We're going to rival Marvel and rival DC. We're going to come up with some superpowers, okay? Who here wants to choose the superpower? You've never used the bathroom. Of all the superpowers you can come up with, you choose that you're going to deceive people into believing you've never used the bathroom. I don't understand them. The second beast, his role is primarily religious in nature, drawing people to worship. He's even reported as doing certain miracles. It says that he can even make fire come down out of heaven to the earth. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Didn't we just see 2 prophets who can do that? Yeah. And those 2 prophets are, of course, based on Moses and Elijah. So again, we have a satanic parody going on here, trying to convince people to worship that which is not God. One of the interesting things here is in verse 14, it said that he deceives. So that makes me wonder if these signs are smoke and mirrors, if they're sleight of hand, or if they're actual satanic power. Throughout world history, there have been people who have claimed to have miraculous powers. There are people who have claimed to do miraculous things by the power of God. But when you scratch below the surface, you notice this doesn't seem quite right. This doesn't seem to fit. One fellow claimed to have found an ancient book written by ancient prophets in the Americas. And it was written in Reformed Egyptian. And he, by the power of God, could translate it into King James Elizabethan English. And this was seen to be a miracle of God. But when you scratch below the surface of the claim, you quickly come to find out that nobody seems to know what exactly Reformed Egyptian is. And the text translated into English then suggests that here in the Americas, prior to the coming of the European, there were horses, and there was wheat, and there were elephants, and all sorts of things that don't match New World archaeology and New World anthropology and so forth. So despite the fact that this fellow claimed this great feat, it was actually not even good smoke and mirrors, because his claim has been shown to be rather false. You'll remember that the wise men and the sorcerers and the magicians of Egypt could do some of the same things that Moses did when he went in before Pharaoh. Now, was this satanic magic, or was this sleight of hand? Both are on the table. Both could be the answer there, huh? This second beast, he wants you to set up an image. Anybody been to Salt Lake? Anyways, he wants you to set up an image Now this word image, it's the same word used when Jesus is asked, should we pay taxes? He wants a coin. And they put a coin in his hand, and he said, whose image is this? That's the same word there. Paul uses this same word in Romans chapter 1 when he says those who suppress the truth of the natural revelation of God, and instead choose to worship the creation rather than the Creator, they exchange the glory of God for an image. Same word used here. I already pointed this out. Locals in the first century, the towns that this book was initially written to, they wanted their town to have a temple to the Caesar or to a member of his family in order to please Rome. They wanted the subjects to worship Caesar and to worship the imperial cult. Now, the test of a true prophet, this is very important. The test of a true prophet, Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, a prophet who is able to do signs and he's able to do wonders, but he says to the people, let's go after other gods and serve them. Remember, this fellow wants you to make an idol. Apostate Israel would make an idol, but would devout Israel make an idol? No, that would be a direct violation of the commandments of God. Also, chapter 18, verse 20, a prophet that speaks in the name of any other god equals a false prophet. So again, we see this beast in the first century. We also see this beast throughout the centuries. The same way the first beast, Rome is a part of that beast. False prophets throughout the last 2 millennia, they have been a part of this second beast. And they're around today. Representative Emmanuel Cleaver, he is a pastor in the United Methodist Church. In the opening prayer in the House of the Representatives, he prayed in the name of the monotheistic God, and then he prayed in the name of the Hindu god Brahma, and in the name of the God of many faiths and religions throughout history. Now what this is called pluralism. Pluralism is the teaching that in the Levant to the Israelites, God revealed himself as Yahweh. But that same God in the East revealed himself as Brahma or any other number of names. And so all of the religions of the world basically worship the same God. Don't think that this morning I'm telling you that Representative Emmanuel Cleaver is the second beast. The same way Rome was a part of the first beast, Emmanuel Cleaver is a part of the second beast. The second beast which teaches false doctrine. The second beast which is glorifying the Antichrist. The second beast that claims to be in the light and claims to have fellowship with God. The second beast that sins and says, I've not sinned. They take the word of God, commandments that God gave, you shall not commit adultery. They commit adultery and they say they have not sinned and they're still in God and they're still in the light. And they say that this is not the revelation of God, it's a revelation of God. And they say that He was not the Christ, He was a Christ. And they lead people away from the worship of the true God and His Christ into the worship of false gods. The same way the Israelites were warned in the Old Testament, the same way we've seen throughout world history, the same way we see today in the United Methodist Church, in the United Church of Christ, in the United Presbyterian Church, in all of these neo-Orthodox and liberal churches, we see glimpses of this second beast. The second beast is not to come. He's not in the future. He's been around throughout the ages. He's here today. He wants to deceive the church. He wants to deceive the people into following the first beast and to worshiping the dragon. With that, we reach a good place to go ahead and stop. Next time we're together, we'll pick it up in Revelation chapter 13, verse 15. And with that, I'll go ahead and open the floor for any questions.